everyone. David McLeod here, your life mastery coach. Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode of Soul Empowerment for 2024. Today, we're going to talk about something that we think is important, and that is, what is really important? It's a question that we often ask ourselves. We often find ourselves in a situation thinking this is really important, only to discover later that there's something far more important than that first thing that we thought was really important. And well, you know what I'm talking about. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to go around the circle in some random order and ask each of my co-hosts to introduce him or herself. And I will start with you today, Sarah.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, because I'm happen to be evening where I am. And I haven't adjusted my lights. Sorry, I've been running late today. I'm in the UK, and I'm a complementary health therapist. I think that's what they call us, although I'm not sure exactly what I am. I work with energy healing, mainly Reiki and sound energy. And that sound is voice toning. It's an energy I love working with. And I found that I can support people to get to a deep cellular memory level, healing hurt, pain, and trauma from early years. That's just a little bit about me.
Thank you, Sarah. And next up today will be Gail.
Hello. Welcome. So I'm Gail Nowak, and I am a New Earth coach, healer, and speaker. And I'm all about redefining leadership and using an energy first, healing centered, and strategic approach to coaching and workshops and retreats for aspiring and emerging New Earth leaders. And I really love to support my clients, and what's important to me is supporting my clients as they learn or improve upon shining confidently, magnetizing their mission, and uplifting humanity with their unique magic.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you. And just because people may not know this, Gail and I just did an episode on Life Mastery TV. That was last week, actually, called Leading from the Heart. So we talked about that whole leadership idea in quite some detail. That was a great episode. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
so thank you for being here, Gail. Scott, please introduce yourself. Tell us all about you.
I'll third that. I thought it was a really nicely done episode. And I wish I could speak as eloquently as Sarah and Gail about what they do. Defining yourself. I am an intuitive healer using different modalities from Reiki to Theta to polarity. And dealing with clients to give them a safe space to be able to understand themselves better so that they can heal themselves, which is, I think, where we all go.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So I remember when we were having our conversation, our planning conversation about this topic, there was a lot of stuff that came up. And I think we were, I don't know, going back and forth on some different ideas. And I said, okay, so what's important? And that's where we kind of landed. And we had a really, really interesting conversation about that. Gail, why don't you start us off? Share with us your perspective on this topic and how the question has impacted you.
I think that it can be really easy for us to get bogged down by the minutia of daily life and take on what's important to other people and not really take the time to tune into our heart, tune into our soul, and ask that question, literally ask that question, what is really important to me? I mean, we sort of come into this world where we're kids growing up, and we're looking to the adults and the caregivers in our life to sort of figure out how to navigate life. And so I think it's very easy to get into that pattern of looking outside oneself, unless you happen to be with adults and caregivers who teach you how look within for those answers. So for me, that question of what's really important, yes, of course, there are times in our lives where, it's more of a surface level kind of question. But when we're thinking about soul empowerment and alignment and fulfillment, it's a really important question to ask, not just once or twice, but really on a regular basis. It could even be like on a daily basis. What's really important for me today? Like what do I feel drawn to? What's important for my health, my peace, my feelings of fulfillment, and to give ourselves the time, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but to really give ourselves that time to just check in and tune in. Because then from that place, when you have the clarity around that, you can make empowered decisions. So that's kind of my take on what this discussion is, what that question means for me. And as far as the impact goes, wow. When I started to do that, it was amazing to me to discover how many things I started to notice that I was doing that either were just sort of embedded patterns that I had because, I was doing it because I thought it was important, or it was important to someone. It wasn't necessarily important to me. Or sort of like from a collective stance that, these are things you should do, right? They're important because this is what our family does, or this is what we do in, the country that we live in, or the culture that we're from. And it really started to help me discern between, am I doing this because it's aligned with my heart and soul, or am I doing this because of some sort of conditioning or programming or messaging, or because, I don't want to hurt somebody or disappoint somebody, or, kind of a little bit of that people pleasing. So it can really help you distinguish, right? Distinguish, excuse me, what's true for you.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And you covered a lot of ground here. Perhaps one of the ways that we can modify the question is to simply rephrase it as, what's really important for me right now? What's really important in my life? And, as well, I don't know what happened to Gail. I think she may have to come back in here. But I guess what I want to say is, sometimes, and I have done this a lot in my past, I do things because someone asks me to do it, and I can tell that it's important to that person. And in my mind, perhaps in my shadow, in my subconscious behavior, I have this idea, well, this person is important in my life. I want to please this person. I love this person, and I don't want this person to be upset or angry with me. So therefore, I will go ahead and, I'll commit to doing something, even though it's not necessarily what's really important to me. So, and I think there's really nothing wrong with wanting to help somebody or to support them in doing something that, makes them happy or whatever. But I think we have to do that from a place of consciousness and not from a place of unconscious shadow where, I'm doing this because I think if I might score points with you. I might be able to come back to you and get you to do me a favor if I do this for you. This is not the reason that we should be doing anything in our lives, right? So that's my perspective. Sarah, what do you think about this?
All of what both of you have said, because what you're talking about, they've now said, is people pleasing is a trauma response, sort of something that has happened in your past, and it makes so much sense. How many people pleasers are there out there? Lots of us, because I've been there. There are still tiny aspects of that. But it's that, as I've said this before, it's that opening up to the fact that what are other people thinking about you? They're not. They've got more than enough stuff going on in their own lives. It's really important, if somebody asks you to do something, to be able to say no because it doesn't resonate with you. And we've talked a lot about sort of family, friend side of things, but from a work perspective, with what I do, And I know you've made suggestions to me in the past, David, and I've just gone, no, doesn't resonate with me, doesn't work with me. For me, I have my own way of doing things. And no, it may not build a business as quick as people would like it to build it. But for me, it is about that energies of choice for me and for everybody else. And isn't that a matter of what's important? If something is really important to somebody, they'll sign up for it, do it, watch it, whatever it is. If it's not that important at that point in time, for those of us who do programs like this, at least we're putting them out there because this feels important to us. For me, when it's not necessarily a matter of going deep inside me and saying, how does this feel? There's aspects of that. But what I will do is I'll get my dowsing pendulum out and I'll say, okay, is this right for me to look at? And if I get a no, I don't. If I get a yes, it's just like, okay, because sometimes the mind can get in the way. And so for me, it's really important that we find our own way to feel into and to listen to, whether we douse, whether we do whatever we feel that we need to do. Maybe some people need to sit and write a list of pros and cons to sort of what is important to us. And so, yes, it's what's important in a whole range of aspects of our lives.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I hope you caught all that, Gail. I know that your computer glitched on you. I saw your text message. I just wanted to double check. So glad you're back. That's great. Scott, why don't you share your perspective on this topic?
When I was thinking about this and going through it, it came to me as judgment. And I'm thinking to myself, where does that come from? So I worked with a yogini for about a year and a half. And we'd go through a monthly kind of homework that I had to do. And one of the things was, if you've ever driven in Boston, judgment, because every other driver is an idiot on the road. And
exactly right.
what do they know what they're doing? How do you know? And she said, well, why do you get upset? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, why do you get upset with them? Well, there's a way to drive and they should know how to drive and. And she said, let's talk about judgment, because it may show up there, but it's not just there. It's not just there. And she says, I want you to write down every time you judge somebody, something, an action, or anything else. Oh, trust me. My hand was sore.
I wouldn't be stopping.
A notebook or two.
So
it would be an encyclopedia.
But it really taught me to see how I was conditioned. My parents were hypercritical. And so it was gaming in our family to bust everybody, my brothers and sisters, and everybody kind of nodded at each other. And I thought everybody thought that was fun and games. But I see my brothers and sisters now as adults, and they are less than. And it took me a long time to get beyond that. And so it was judgment. And when it came away, and it was that presence of mind of not judging, just, we talk about allowing. A lot of times when we're dealing with clients, when we're talking with each other, it's about allowing, the acceptance. But true allowing, true acceptance, in other words, it is what it is. Is it important to me? And that's the thing. The judgments became so much less important. It didn't matter. It didn't fill my head. It didn't fill my how I reacted with people. It didn't fill me up anymore. And all of a sudden, when I'm not judging it, I'm sitting back and I'm like, the world really isn't that chaotic. Everyone should think like I do, but of course they don't. So the judgment part of that allowed me much better clarity to see what truly was important, because it took all of the detritus, all the little conversations that go on in your head. It took it away from me and allowed me to be much more present. And Gail, as you said, when you get down to it, allowing yourself to make judgments about your life, about your family, about real things that impact you, the calmer, the clearer, the more grounded you are, the more heart-centered you are, it's so much better results. And when you allow things to go through that process, through the heart, all of a sudden things really calm down. It isn't the roller coaster that, most of my life was until I got to that point. And now ups and downs, absolutely. But I don't get thrown by things. I don't have an expectation of things being done my way. And there is, for me, it was all about judgment in other people and hypercritical of myself and expectations of what other people should do because I thought they should do it. And they should do it my way, of course. Every single person here does things their own way, the way they were conditioned, the way they were taught, the way they learned, the way that they found that works best for them. And when you honor that and hold that sacred, all of a sudden, half the BS that goes on in your head goes away. And it really allows you to be present.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the subject of judgment because I'm going to say something here that might trigger some people. But I think it's all right. I'm okay with that. Just think about that word important. The word important is itself a judgment word. As a matter of fact, we amplified that by putting the word really in front of that. How much additional judgment can we add to this word important? I would say, if you think about this, virtually every adjective and every adverb that we create in our language is a judgment word intended to express our own perspective on something. I don't think we can claim with any certainty that any one thing, any one idea, any one concept is more important than any other in reality. Not in the grand scheme of things. It's only important in terms of our existence and how we show up in the world. That's what I am seeing now. And it's interesting to me that this didn't come up when we were having our initial planning conversation, but I'm glad it did now because this is a powerful, powerful concept. See, I just made another judgment there. The word powerful. That's just my judgment, my observation with some flavor added to it. So at what point, how do we express ourselves in completely absent of judgment? How do we do that? Because every time we use words that like adjectives and adverbs and so forth, we're describing our preference or, well, maybe we might be saying this is a really bad thing, for example, right? But we're describing a preference, saying, I'd rather not experience that thing, whatever it is over there, that I am labeling as really bad. So I'm really describing a preference, right? A preference or an aversion or something like that. This is really, really interesting to me. And again, my judgment. So at what point how do we communicate with each other? How do we share with each other without using any form of judgment at all? I'm not sure that it's possible in our current state of consciousness, but it's certainly something to think about. Wouldn't you agree?
Isn't that down to vocabulary though? Plus the fact, doesn't a word have many different meanings depending on the person who's hearing it and the experiences that they have had? Because even the word important can have different meanings for different people. And I've said this so many times, sort of, I could be standing in a room giving a talk to 100 people, and I know what I mean, but what they've heard could be different for every single one of them. It's the same of our conversation here. People are going to be hearing it, but they're going to be hearing it from their experiences, their understanding, their perspective of life. So while we have the different understandings, and we have to use words, we're always going to have that situation, aren't we, of not. That's why what I love about light language. The mind doesn't understand it, but the heart and the soul does. And it can't be interpreted and therefore misinterpreted. So what is important? Maybe the important thing is to really listen to somebody else. Not listen to the first part of the sentence, the paragraph, whatever, but listen to everything they've got to say. And having listened, see whether you can truly understand what they're saying. And maybe we have to ask questions to get an understanding. Because yes, what is important to one person is not going to be important to others. You can ask, but if it's not a priority to me, if it doesn't resonate with me, then my answer is likely to be no.
I think that's an interesting perspective too. And I hear you say that perhaps we should listen. But isn't there a judgment in that statement? Isn't there a preference? I'd rather have people listen than talk while I'm speaking. I mean, I'm just saying, this is just me. I'm getting down pretty semantic niggly wiggly here, but the point I'm trying to make is each of us on this planet, currently in our current state of consciousness, at the moment, I will say we seem to be limited in our communication abilities by the power of words. That doesn't mean that that's the only form of communication. And in fact, I know that there are people who claim to be psychics and people who can do telepathy and other forms of communication. So maybe those people know how to share their experience completely with another person without using a single word. I would love to be able to do that, because then I believe, now maybe I'm wrong about this, but I would imagine that if I could just simply take my experience and somehow wiggle it and waffle it and plop it onto you, you could say, oh, now I know what you're talking about. And you might choose completely different words to describe it. So I agree with you, Sarah, that communication is a big part of our challenge. But I think I was just pointing out that almost everything that we do is founded in some form of judgment. Now, you don't have to use that word judgment, because judgment sounds kind of negative. People think that if you judge, then therefore you're judgmental. And well, okay, I am. I admit it. I'm a human being, and I have that same capability and quality as pretty much every other human being. I make assessments of things. I make decisions based on those assessments. To me, that is a form of judgment. All right. It doesn't have to be a negative connotation. So when I'm judging something to be important, I'm giving it higher value in my own assessment as part of my experience. And I am assuming that if it's important to me, then it's probably important to you too. But that may not be true. So you see, there's a lot of nuances here that we could play with in terms of communication and everything else, right? But we still have to deal with each other on the limited basis that we have right now. So the question that I'm asking, I guess, is how I still want to know if anybody has any clue how we can live completely free of judgment. I haven't figured it out. And I have not, I hear people preaching about it. Oh, let go of your judgments, let go of your judgments. And what they're really saying is let go of your negative thinking about something. That's what they're really saying. You know, well, I can't afford to let go of my judgments and still hope to survive in this physical world. You know, if I'm driving on the road and I see a guy, you know, half a mile away signaling to turn left, my mind is saying, is he going to turn left now or is he going to wait till I go by? I have to make an assessment. I have to make a judgment based on what information I have available. Do you see? So there's nothing wrong with that form of judgment. In fact, frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with any form of judgment, but I think what we need to do is bring consciousness and awareness to it all. That's what I believe. Okay, I've ranted enough.
Ms. Gail.
Yeah, I'm absorbing all of this, and I agree with each of you on different points. And yeah, so I guess I'll start with David. Like I'm not sure that the goal really is I mean, I guess it's possible if we're having the discussion around it, right? To truly not judge. I don't think that we're there yet as society. And on the same side, I appreciate especially what you said, David, about bringing consciousness to it. It's far more easier, at least in my experience, to be messy about a thing and to know how to clean it up versus to cut off a thing, right? Like, so if I notice a pattern about myself about being judgmental in the sense of, oh, I'm doing this thing where I'm getting, this is just one example of judgment, right? Like I get triggered and then I have something to say about the situation that's negative or that I want to control. I think that judgment and control can be partners a lot of times, right? So when we're thinking about judgment in that way versus judgment as a tool for discernment, and I noticed that pattern, that negative pattern, and how it causes suffering, right? It actually causes me suffering because I'm trying to control something that number one, I can't control. Number two, I have no business controlling, right? And so the opportunity there is, okay, number one, do I want to keep doing this? Number two, if I don't want to keep doing this, I can't possibly expect to just eradicate it from my life. So how do I go about just noticing? How do I go about just noticing? Oh, I did it again. I did that judgy thing that I do, right? And it's like baby steps, self-love, like, I did it again. I did it again. And ultimately it will start to shift, right? But I think that, humans love to operate in extremes, and it's like everything is a spectrum and we don't have to be perfect in it. It's okay to be messy with it. And that's what the game of improvement and growth and change is all about, is allowing, Scott, you mentioned that word earlier, right? Like allowing ourselves to show up as who we are, right? Like with our flaws, with our strengths, with things that are challenging for us, and allowing others to show up in that. I think that, for some people, that's the trickier part. I know that that's harder for me sometimes. That's where I start to go into judgment. And the other piece that is a part of that too is like trusting, okay, this is something that matters to me. This is something that's important to me. This is something I'm working on, and trusting that I will be okay and everybody else around me will be okay, even if it doesn't look that way. And even if they don't think it's okay or I'm okay or they're going to be okay, right? Like you're right. Like there's a lot of nuances to this. there's a lot of pieces to this. It requires a lot of intention and attention and practice. And I think that what it really boils down to is getting in touch with what's true for oneself, and also learning how to sit with what's true for another, knowing that you don't have to agree with it. And you also don't have to judge it, right? Or you might have a judgment about it. And you don't have to try to convince or persuade or change the other person to make what's important for you important for them too. Or you don't have to fit yourself into a box so that what's important to them is important to you too.
Yeah, I like the way you wrapped that up and brought it back to the topic. Nicely done. Scott, you got something that you want to say there?
She does that very well, doesn't she? So a plumber used to have a sign over his desk, and it said, "Your emergency does not make it mine." And I went, "Wait a minute, isn't that the reason you're here?" He says, "Well, something's really important to you, but I have other things that I'm doing." So, importance of the immediacy, the importance of somebody's faucet spouting water and the kitchen is filling up. Well, the plumber's sitting at his house and he's good. So the importance that we have within our lives, and how we have expectations of other people and how they handle it. So, story that happened Monday. I'm getting ready for work, and I'm in work mode. I'm thinking, okay, I got to do this. When I get to work, I got to do these 5 things, and I get a phone call. It's my sister at 6:30 in the morning, and I went, ooh, not good. She picks it up, and she's practically in tears. I said, what's going on? She says, well, I have to get my husband to the hospital in Boston, and last night when I was shoveling snow, I hurt my he's in a wheelchair right now. I hurt my knee. I can't drive. I can't do anything. And I said, hold on a second. So I just shifted the gear. Said, of course I'll do it. What do you need? So I went over and I took care of it, got him out of the house, got him into the hospital. We had a great 3 hours. My brother-in-law and I, when we got back, my sister had gone to the doctors and found out she had a sprained MCL. Everything went smooth as silk. And because it was important to her. So I chose, we talk about boundaries all the time. I chose to allow it to be important to me. But in doing that, it wasn't about judgment, about what you should do, how you should do it, how can I help, and left it that way. And it really, what surprised me was no traffic going in. Now, we're talking Boston on a Monday morning. No traffic going in. We got in an hour. They took us early. By the time 15 minutes after we were scheduled to have the appointment, we were downstairs getting back in the car. It was amazing. For anybody who's ever been to a major hospital in a major city, you know that just doesn't happen. So all of those things happened. Everything was aligned. And my sister and my brother-in-law had this, they had this anxiety, and they were choking on it, and there was this fear. And I just looked at them and said, okay, we're going to get this done. Let's see how best to do it. And all of a sudden, everything just went right down to nothing. The reason I bring that up is because the boundaries it's of the utmost importance that we do this, when in fact it doesn't really affect me. But when you allow it to affect you, when you take on that responsibility of, it's important to somebody I love, so therefore I'm going to help with that. That's different. That includes the boundaries that we have for ourselves, but also for those people around us. And because a lot of people, when I talk to them about it, clients especially, they don't like walls, they don't like fences, they don't like parameters, they've never been in a box, they don't like being in a box, they don't like limitations. Say, okay, can you live with a speed bump? Excuse me? Speed bump. You know, you have to slow down, you go over it, you hear a bump, right? You go over a speed bump. If you set those parameters as speed bumps, you're not shutting anybody out. But when people get to them, they have to slow down, and you can hear them, and you can acknowledge them, and you can understand that they're there. And then you can choose whether you want to let them in or not. And so boundaries as far as importance go, and I find that within myself, I'm more self-limiting than I am with other people. I limit myself more than I limit other people. And I've lowered those walls that are around me to be able to do the same thing. And that is have an early warning system, not electrified fences and 15-foot stone walls,
Right.
but those speed bumps to be able to be able to work with things so that things can still move, but maybe at a slower pace so I can take it all in.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, one thing I heard from all that was one thing may seem really important in any given moment, and in another moment something else may show up to supersede that first thing. So because you were describing about getting yourself ready for work, which at that point was your number one priority, and then getting the phone call, which shifted priorities completely. Yeah, that's something that we all have to deal with, isn't it? Shifting priorities, and being open to unexpected things, which some people might think of as obstacles or fences or speed bumps, as it were, but are maybe just opportunities delivered from the universe to show up as who you really are. Maybe that's what the point is. And in fact, my belief is when I ask myself the question, what's really important? To me, there's nothing more important than experiencing and expressing the full and complete truth of who I really am. That's my number one priority in every situation. And I think that is really, if people may not realize this, but I think that's the ultimate level of importance for everyone. Because if we cannot show up truthfully as who we really are, then what are we doing? We're pretending. That's what we're doing. We're faking it, you know? And why are we pretending or faking? Well, because of the conditioning that we've all talked about in the past. But that conditioning has gotten so hardwired into our system that we're doing it without even thinking about it. So my encouragement to everyone is get yourself out of this little, playground up here and down into the joy ground right here.
Yeah.
This place where your true essence resides, and really connect to that and let that be what leads you going forward. Because it gets much easier, I believe, to say yes to somebody's need when I know I'm doing it from a place of authentic David, authentic me, rather than trying to do it from that pretend David over here that likes to be seen, wants to be cuddled, wants to be loved, wants to be revered. That part of me that is still so insecure that it needs that kind of acknowledgement and recognition. So if I can learn to just stay grounded in the truth of who I really am, which I believe is the most important thing for me to be doing, that allows me then to stay fully aligned with my truth, and all of the events that show up in my life tend to just flow much more easily, much more naturally. And I think that's kind of what you were describing there, Scott, perhaps not using those words, but essentially staying true to who you really are and choosing from that place of authenticity to support your sister and her husband. Just my perspective. Your mileage may vary.
I think I sort of, what Scott was sharing made me think about what happened to me last year in the flat tire, and the ending up by having to wait 5 hours for somebody to come out and sort of support me. And so what was my priority? Absolutely getting help. There was no two ways about it. That was really important. I couldn't go anywhere other than stay put. That was it. And yeah, my friend Trevor, eventually, when I sort of rang him after I'd got one of the last messages, sort of saying it was going to be another 2.5 hours or whatever it was till they got to me, and bless him, his priority became driving an hour and a half to come to me and see whether he could help. And so, like you, Scott, he dropped everything to make sure I was okay. You dropped everything to make sure your sister and her husband were okay. And sometimes that is really important, to be able to do that. Because they are, mine wasn't an emergency situation. It was just, I actually feel I was blessed by that 5 hours in some respects. I had nothing to read, couldn't listen to the radio for fear of a flat battery. There was just absolutely nothing for me to do. And I don't have one of these all singing or dancing phones that I've got games on, which I wouldn't know what to do with anyway. I had nothing to do other than just sit there and be with me. And I've heard people say, oh, sort of what you went through. And I can't remember the negative words they were using around it. And I just thought, no, it wasn't like that. I was just able to be calm. Yeah, it was a long 5 hours to a certain degree. It tipped it down with rain at times, beautiful rainbows at other times. I was very lucky. It was summer months, so it wasn't dark like it would be now. For most of the time, it was light for most of the time. And so it's when things were going on like that, if you're the person on the other end of the phone and somebody's needing help and you can give that help, sometimes that is the important thing to do.
Okay.
And other times, somebody's saying they require help, and you know jolly well they're perfectly capable of doing it themselves. And it is not a priority to you, and it is okay to say no.
Right.
The importance is saying yes to yourself at the right times for you. And I think, and saying yes to yourself is very much a matter of saying no to others at times. But as I've said so many times, when we're constantly doing for others, neither of us are actually being. We are not doings, we are beings. So how are we being with each other? And I'm not here to live anybody else's life for them. Yes, I'm here to interact within people's lives, but I'm not here to live it for them. They have choices. And it's really important for us to allow them to grow as well, giving us that space to grow. And so that does become about what is important. And sometimes what appears to be a negative to them can be the biggest gift you can give them and you can receive for yourself.
Beautiful. There's something that just struck me as you were speaking about, sitting in your car waiting for 5 hours. I imagine that while that 5 hours was spreading out in time, you had some anxiety or whatever else was going on for you in your body. But afterwards, when it's all over, this is something I've noticed in my life. Some events that happen in my life that were really not pleasant to go through. When I come back and I think about those events after the fact, I look at the memory. It doesn't take me 5 hours to go through the memory. The memory is like that. It's just there, And I know I've heard women who have given birth have talked about this. they say that during the experience, there's a lot of pain and intensity and other kinds of things that are going on. But after it's all over, like 2 or 3 or 4 months afterwards, they can't remember the pain anymore. In fact, all they remember is the joy of having that baby come into the world. It's really fascinating to me how things shift and change just when we look at them from the perspective of hindsight. You know, our memories don't last as long as the original experience does. And so consequently, it's hard, I think, to really remember all of the details of the previous experience. I don't know. Scott, you were going to say something.
It's always amazed me how women, 9 months after they've had a child, say, "Hey, let's do that again." I went, "Do you remember anything?" Because I have a very vivid memory. You know that if men had ever been blessed with the ability to give birth, the first one would have said, "You know how much pain this was? You do not want to do it." We would be extinct if men were giving birth. It just always strikes me that how strong women are to be able to go through that process and come back and say, "Yes, let's do that again." Just an observation.
Yeah, and I think you're making a judgment about men that isn't really true. And
Well,
I assume that it was meant to be a joke, but I just want
it's
to
meant to
draw
be a
attention
joke.
to that.
It's meant to be a joke. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are 5 or 6 guys who would be able to have children. Yes.
There are plenty of guys who have gone through some horrible things in their lives and then
Boy,
after recovery have gone and done them again.
I think, oh, that's true. That is true. That is true.
I'm not sure. It might be a little bit of a judgment about women too, because I'm thinking
That's
about
right.
my own birth experiences, and I'm like, I don't know. Getting my wisdom teeth out was pretty gnarly. Like they're right up the two of those, giving birth and getting your wisdom teeth out. That was pretty painful.
But you didn't choose to
yeah.
get your wisdom teeth out again, right? You did choose to have birth again.
No, I didn't choose to get my wisdom teeth out again because they were gone. But I probably wouldn't choose it again. You're right. You're right. I want to circle back to Scott's story and then also Sarah's sort of reflection on that, and also kind of bring it back to how we started. I think part of the reason why it's important to check in with ourselves about what matters to us is so that in those moments, like Scott had of shifting priorities on the fly and doing it from a place that feels really sourced and resourced versus out of obligation, right? Or just a snap judgment, or like, oh my God, here we go again, or that kind of default place. Asking that question on a regular basis, like really, really getting honest with yourself and getting really clear with yourself about what's important for you. How do I love myself? How do I take care of myself? How do I resource myself? Makes it a lot easier to show up in the truth of who you are in those situations, right? Because you're not giving from a place of depletion. You're giving from a place of overflow. And so it kind of ties back into like this practice of really getting to know yourself and know what's true for you and know what you care about, so that yes, you can show up as the truth of who you are, and also decide like, geez, here's my family member who's really in a jam, and to discern like, is this sort of just the pattern? Is this just their pattern, and they're and maybe there's a codependent pattern, or is this really, do I feel drawn and called to support them because I know I can, and I have the energy and the resources to do that.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah, nicely said. So I guess here we are faced with this question: what's really important? And I think each of us is able, on some level, to ask ourselves this question every single moment. Another way of phrasing it, you might ask yourself, well, what's the best use of my time and resources right now? That's an alternate way of phrasing it. And I remember using that when I was involved in a startup company and we're trying to sell products. And I would, believe it or not, I was involved in sales. And the question I would ask myself is, what's the best use of my time right now? It didn't really help, but because I hadn't really done any of my personal growth work at that time. But I think today it does make more sense to me, because I have a clearer understanding of who I really am, and a better sense of what my purpose is here on the planet. So when I ask the question, what's really important, or what's the best use of my time and resources right now, it usually helps me to focus by having those two pieces, the truth of who I am and why I'm here, clearly in my mind. So they're like a beacon out there on the hill. And I say, right, if I choose this, it's going to take me away. It might bring me back, but I can't see how it's going to bring me back here. Right now, I see a way of going direct. So I'm going to choose that. So each of us has that opportunity in every single moment. That's my perspective.
It's also important to trust your intuition, your gut instinct. Something crops up and it's just like, oh, and that feels wrong, that feels right. And so the important thing to do is to listen to that. There are quotes out there. It's a bit, if it feels wrong, if your gut instinct says it feels wrong, it usually is. And you may think, no, it's important. I want to do that. We make a choice. We make a judgment.
Right.
And we think, no, not going to listen to that. Most of the time, I think we think, why didn't I listen?
Yeah.
But that's the joy. What's important? It's the choices we make. And it is up to us to then accept what comes with those choices. And
Right.
there are many things that can't be undone. So we are stuck with the choices we have made. We can move forward from them, but we can't go backwards from them.
Yeah,
And
right.
and life isn't about going backwards. Life is about moving forwards from the choices that we make.
Yeah,
So,
beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Something you just said again, I find myself resonating with this. It is important to trust your intuition. I agree with that. And sometimes you may get a message, a deep hit, that you do have to take a new direction, a detour that might seem like it's going to take you backwards or away from your ultimate objective. But the thing is, remember, our logical scientific minds all think in terms of Pythagorean geometry, where the straightest or the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. In the spiritual world, that may not be true. In the spiritual realm, when you're listening to your intuition, it may be necessary to take what appears to be a triangular approach to go from point A to point B. And it might look like a longer distance on paper, but it might be a shorter distance in terms of your soul's expression. So do trust your intuition. And when the intuition says, don't do this, that's not right for you, pay attention. How many times I know I have done this many times, just completely ignored that and done what my ego mind wanted to do, only to realize later, sorry, didn't work out. Yeah, that's happened to me on numerous occasions. So it is important. And you have to develop that trust. You have to kind of just say, okay, pause, check with my intuition. Does my intuition agree with this choice or not? And if not, what is it proposing as an alternative? That's how I like to do it.
Silence. We're all absorbing that.
Well, it appears that we are approaching just a natural stopping point. And so I want to give everybody a chance to say something before we close out. And Sarah, I know you have to leave right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to give you first dibs. I'd like you to share final words so that we can close out in a powerful way.
I'd like to share my words for people's heart and soul, rather than from their mind, their ego. So I am going to share with a bit of light language, and please don't ask me to translate it. I have no idea what I'm about to say. Kish tanaka te I, noch ni a matekeha, nahash na I kite, kointai nishish, mahas tanaka hanete, Vihanada taharana hashiomanaka, yantarana kate ii, noish tanatana ke, ish anaka aletea kateania, matakahana chia kapateania chiatea, lash nanata eki, pik tanakahohanotumiash, kahanata ayakaranakushinia, tehatata, tihan, eshea katai, noish nakata, emiaka. Namaste.
Thank you. Scott.
Always leaves me a little bit verklempt. It hits a place in here, and it kind of takes me a minute to kind of catch it. I love when you do that, Sarah. Thank you very much. But the importance of what at different points in our lives, I think there is importance. There's points of importance. There's when you're 17, when you're 25, when you're 45, they're all, life is, importance takes on a different role entirely, or what is important. And when we reach out to all those people out there that listen to us, find what, if you don't know, find out what is important to you. And you do that with listening, with sharing, with meditation, with understanding who you truly are, why you're here, what journey you're on, and where you're heading. And just listening will give more importance to things that you didn't necessarily know were important. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Scott. Gail?
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Sarah. I felt that. I felt like lots of expansion in my heart, my chest, and also in my back, the back of my heart too. So beautiful. I love your language. So what's important? We didn't really touch on this, and I feel like there could be a whole other episode.
Write it down.
You're important. You're important. David, you're important. Sarah, you're important. Scott, you're important. Those who are tuning in, you are important. Important in the sense of you matter, right? I'm not speaking about important necessarily as, even though you might be important in that way, from more of an ego perspective, really that each and every one of us are here because we matter. And so what does that look like for you? Like, how do you show yourself that you matter? How do you show love and care to yourself? And we talked about some ways today for tuning into answering that question for yourself. And sometimes it's not an easy, it's not necessarily clear right away or an easy process to get to if it's something that you're not used to. And there are 4 people here who can support you with that. The show can support you with that. We live in a time and an age where we're really fortunate to have lots of different teachers and mentors and containers to get into, to get the kind of support to help us really figure out the truth of who we are, which is something that we talked about today. And really hear, amidst the very loudness of our world, hear what truly is important. So if you need help with that, it's available. All you have to do is ask, and remember that you are important too.
Absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And I think that I would just add that the very fact that you are here, the very fact that you exist, the very fact that you were born is proof enough that you matter, because every single one of us contributes in some way to the overall experience of all that is. And that's why each of us is necessary. Even those people who may not appeal to us so much, even those people who we judge to be less than, to be bad, to be evil, to be just, wrong kinds of people in this world. Those people, those beings are important as well, because they reflect to us what we don't want to look at within ourselves. So everything, everybody, everything, all the animals, all the plants, everything, all of it contributes to our overall experience of all that is. And it's very, very important. That is powerful stuff right there. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for watching the recording. And remember that we have recordings of this and every other episode on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. And we'll see you next month on Soul Empowerment. Bye-bye, everybody.